I wrapped up work on Friday afternoon just as Leslie and Carly arrived at my place. We piled into my fiancé Josh's car, since his is the only one I trusted to get us all the way to our trailhead. And after a few hours on I-70, we were leaving the paved roads of Aspen and weaving our way up dirt. It was certainly a rough ride, but I got over my recently developed fears, and the RAV4 carried us all the way to the Capitol Creek trailhead. We gathered our gear and set out for our first night of a long weekend in the backcountry. The climb toward Hell Roaring Trailhead was steep and immediate, and at the top, completely mosquito-ridden. We stopped briefly to apply bug spray before continuing our trek. After eyeing the maps, we spotted a lake under a mile from the main trail and decided it might be a good destination for camp. As we climbed toward the lake, we were greeted with lots of snow and wet terrain. The trail was in rough shape, but easy enough to follow. When we got to the lake, the slog through the snow proved to be worth it. We began to set up our tents just in time for rain. Since this was my first time pitching my new tent, there was a bit of a learning curve, and the final rushed result was quite sad, but it did keep me dry. After the rain stopped, I fixed my tent and we enjoyed a serene, slightly chilly dinner by the lake. We decided the night before that we weren't really in any rush. Our Friday start had afforded us a very relaxed itinerary, and we only had about 17 miles to cover before Sunday, so we slept in and enjoyed our morning at the campsite. I enjoyed my cereal with breakfast essentials and had my favorite instant coffee sitting by the lake with Leslie and Carly. Eventually, we packed up our things and began our journey back toward the main trail. As soon as we rejoined our planned loop, we shot straight up again. The climb was consistently steep for about a mile before we hit more snow. We continued up on top of the snow, wondering how long that would be possible. Around 11,000 feet, we reached an even steeper section of snow and decided it was time to get out the microspikes. I was determined to see how far up we could go, so we kept climbing until around 11,600 feet, where it became apparent that even out of the timber, the snow was still holding on. I explored a little farther up the pass without my pack, but since we didn't know what the second pass would hold, we decided to turn our loop into 2 out and backs. That way, we knew we could efficiently return to our car by the end of the trip. So, after a little exploration above treeline, we turned around and descended all the same snow we had just climbed up. There were several glissades, both voluntary and involuntary, and a few unexpected post holes. We found an awesome camp spot surrounded by aspens that we had passed on the way in and decided to call it home for the night despite it being a fairly short hiking day. We had about 6 miles to hike to our permitted lake spot, so we were once again afforded the luxury of a slow morning, and we even waited out some rain. It's such a weird adjustment to go from through hiking to leisurely backpacking, but I'm definitely not complaining. We briefly returned to the car and I dropped off some extra food and picked up my sleeping bag liner, apprehensive of how cold it would be sleeping at 11,600 feet with so much snow still around. We are officially on our way to Capitol Lake, finally. We left yesterday to try and do a loop, ran into too much snow, so then we hiked back to the car. Actually, we left on Friday to do the loop. Camped at a lake like 3 miles in, went another mile and ran into too much snow, and then we walked back to the car yesterday, had a nice spot last night, and today we're heading to the lake, and we've heard it's pretty snowy there too, but we went up to about the same elevation yesterday, so I think it'll be fine. After a beautiful, somewhat flat walk through aspen groves, we started to gain elevation once again and the valley opened up, revealing the beauty of the Elk Mountains and Maroon Snowmass wilderness. We'd been staring at Capitol Peak in the distance for the last 2 days, and as our proximity to the peak increased, the views only became more impressive. Since we took the higher trail, we saved ourselves a 400-foot descent and a more treacherous stream crossing of Hell Roaring Creek. The crossing where we were was very manageable, but there was no way we were making it through with dry feet. Not knowing what lay ahead, we opted to go barefoot, hoping to keep our socks dry. We had lunch at the creek, an almost perfect halfway point for the day, before continuing on and up. It wasn't long before we encountered more snow, and, in hindsight, taking our shoes off for the creek crossing seemed like a futile effort. There were several steeper snow traverses where the trail hugged the side of a slope, but with kicked-in steps and spikes, we made it through fairly easily and were able to completely avoid the one high-consequence fall zone. From there, we went up one last chute that made me thankful once again for our spikes, and brought back memories of the San Juans and the High Sierra. At the top of the chute, we came upon our permitted site, nestled in some pine trees and somehow free of snow. We decided to continue on to the lake before setting up camp, and began a slog across a large snowfield with baby suncups. Soon, we crested a rocky outcropping that gave way to an ice-covered Capitol Lake. We spent all afternoon, over 5 hours, in this incredible spot. We gathered water from the lake's unbelievably blue depths and scoped out the route we almost took. We even saw people come through, although it did look like they struggled a bit on some of the steeper snowfields. I practiced being content with our decision to change plans, something I'm still learning to do even after 2 through hikes. I imagine the snow played a huge part in us having the lake mostly to ourselves, which made it easier to let go of the loop we originally intended to hike. We shooed away marmots and cooked dinner as the sun moved across the sky, and I again reminded myself how nice it is to do shorter miles and spend so much time in such a gorgeous and untouched place. As the sun began to set, we decided to make our way the 0.2 of a mile back to camp so we wouldn't end up pitching our tents in the dark. We discovered the spaces were quite small and less than ideal, but we found ways to adapt. Leslie and Carly let me have first choice, and so I fell asleep staring at Capitol Peak through my mesh tent door. I woke up to the same phenomenal view in the middle of the night when the full moon rose, and again in the morning when the sun rose. We had another slow morning watching marmots play in the snow, and chatting with our site neighbor who had turned around on his attempt to summit Capitol. After coffee, breakfast, and a bathroom break, we started the 6-mile walk back to the car. The snow traverses proved less daunting now that we knew what we were in for, and it felt like we were back on dry ground in no time. We didn't bother removing our shoes for our second crossing of Hell Roaring Creek, and before long, we were back in the beautiful aspen groves. I was grateful for another successful backcountry trip with great company, and for yet another lesson in adapting to whatever the trail brings.